Now, the next PIP with the Metro Transit Authority, we're going to be talking about Rideshare Pilot. We have Councilman Bill Pridemore, we have Councilman Mina Johnson, and we have Councilman Russ Pulley, who have also joined us. Thank you. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Our next and final PIP, which probably is as much a relief to you as it is to me. It's for our proposed rideshare pilot, and the issue is to better integrate existing and traditional mass transit with the current and emerging service models that are more individualized in nature. Although, as I mentioned earlier, with some of the more traditional improvements, Nashville is developing a density that will support enhanced traditional mass transit in a number of corridors. Much of our service area remains in lower density development that makes traditional transit challenging to provide efficiently. This characteristic of our service area, but the high level of willingness of our citizens to use services that don't rely on their own car, have given rise to amazing growth of options like Lyft and Uber in Nashville over the last few years. This particular slide from our ongoing in-motion process really shows kind of the densities necessary to warrant various levels of service. And keeping in mind what the public has told us about frequency, convenience, affordability, you name it, frankly, the idea that we move toward a lot of 60-minute frequency bus routes that operate 6 hours a day really is not a tenable or viable solution for the city moving forward. For many in our city, these options, the options like Lyft and Uber, have been proven to be extremely convenient, but for longer trips, they can be fairly pricey. So our intent with this is that through better integration of these emerging models with traditional mass transit, we might expect to capitalize on the strengths of both. The quick, convenient, and personal connections that are being made with rideshare services to take you to and from affordably distanced trips. I happen to live in East Nashville, so Uber and Lyft are pretty affordable to come into town. If you live in Madison or Antioch, maybe not quite as much. So if we're able to make those connections to get them to the longer line services, particularly as we develop frequency and span and ultimately, hopefully, some travel time advantages for those types of corridors, then all of a sudden you can have the best of both worlds. So by integrating things like the trip planning software, I mentioned the APIs earlier, that's something that's being done in several places around the country, ultimately through fare integration, so it can be seamlessly done, maybe even in bundled rates or group types of ratings. We might see more affordable connections as related to what we can do now. And this just illustrates a few examples of that. So we look at, in some of our stronger corridors, the Gallatin Road corridor up toward Madison, the West End corridor and Charlotte toward West Nashville, Nolensville toward Antioch, and Murfreesboro toward the Bell corridor. Flat fare for the bus is $1.70 in each of those, and at least as of the point in time where we pulled up the apps on the rideshare providers, $12 to $16 to come into downtown Nashville on rideshare from Madison, and you can see the other comparisons. If, in contrast, we were to develop a system where it works, obviously people still have the ability to do a direct trip via the rideshare provider, but with an option to do first mile, last mile types of service into our mainline transit, all of a sudden that combo trip, even without factoring in pricing incentives or what have you to encourage usage, all of a sudden can drop to half to two-thirds the existing price. So it becomes much more affordable for possible users. With respect to the primary role of our outside partners, we've worked closely with the Taxi Licensing Commission. We have existing relationships with the taxi providers in Nashville, particularly on our Access Ride system. So we would expect that relationship to deepen and become even more robust. Obviously, as mentioned in the earlier application, Metro's Information Technology Department becomes a crucial partner, particularly in identifying the technology, and the rideshare partners, as evidenced here today, become absolutely crucial. They are that first mile, last mile. But the other applicability, coming back to questions that Mr. Riebling had posed, is they become viable. Some of the crosstown corridors we've identified where maybe there isn't enough density to do a particular crosstown bus route, but there is to do a group trip type of an application through the rideshare providers, interagency billing types of accounts, and the technology interfaces for scheduling real-time information transportation, ultimately mobile fare payment. One of the things we've talked about with Lyft and Uber is, if you're used to their app, it's, hey, the car will be here in 2 minutes. But even integrating with our bus vehicle location to say, you know what, we're not going to pick you up quite that early. We'll get you to the bus stop 2 minutes before the bus gets there, so you don't have those extended waits at transfer locations that people often find as a deterrent to transit use. So those are some of the options that we're looking at that are available. They've been ongoing conversations with ourselves, certainly the rideshare providers, members of the mayor's office, what have you, and we would look to maximize that type of outreach. Projected outcomes, obviously we'd be looking at pure trip volumes, we'd be looking at overall MTA ridership increase, paired trip increases, number of individuals using service. All of a sudden, mass transit would become more viable for people who are maybe a little outside of our catchment area, particularly given some of the neighborhoods where pedestrian access is more limited. And then again, I would say a measure of success, and I think Keith Durbin would agree, is, hey, the fact we can actually get this stuff to work together, would be kind of an interesting outcome. With that, that concludes our shared ride pilot presentation. It also concludes the last of our PIPs. And next year, I'm sure Talia will counsel me. One or two.
Okay, so let me kick off questions. Especially as it relates to this particular PIP, there's a $500,000 ask for this, which is strictly just paying for trips. And so what, if any, component is needed from the previous $10 million investment to make this one happen, or can this one stand on its own?
I think our goal really is to crawl before we walk before we run. So the theory would be we could do this without the technology. We want to move forward on the technology in one way, shape, or form for a variety of reasons, but let's assume. Now, I know that you're just so blown away by all four that these are now the top
Well, I think there's a solution in one, so.
But let's assume this were the one that you had the highest interest in. Our intent would be to work with the partners, both the external partners and the metro partners, to identify those specific markets where this could work best up front. First mile, last mile, some of the crosstown, potentially some of the after hours types of activities, and also some of our access ride demand to relieve some of the pressure there.
And let's talk about that for a second, because with outside partners like Lyft and Uber, I'm not sure about the disability component, and I'm not sure that that's something that they're equipped to do. I know that a lot of our taxis are, so, but is this a space that you guys have played in, the disability space?
So we have a number of products on our platform across the U.S. and depending on the city need, with ridesharing, since we don't own any vehicles, it depends on the vehicles that are in that city that are people signing up to use it. But we look forward to continuing to partner with more people that have those options. So in cities like in New Orleans, for example, we have a product called Uber Access, which basically helps people with access needs in those products. So depending on this need of the city and the vehicles in that city.
The other thing I would highlight is a number of our Access Ride customers. Access Ride is available if your disability prevents you from completing a trip. For a significant percentage, it's not the vehicle per se that's the issue. It's access to and from the stop. So they may be ambulatory to get into or out of, say, an auto, but it's the fact that, well, I've got to go a quarter mile, and so those are the types of trips where, frankly, we use a lot of taxi overflow that would be, a particular market for the rideshare providers. That would then free up capacity on our Lyft-equipped service, where even the concept of what I'll call reverse Uber comes up, that, well, if MTA has excess capacity at certain times of day, can commercial trips be fed, into that network?
The Uber or Lyft app. Fascinating. Michael?
I don't have a question on this one.
The $500,000, you've got that down as some startup, just as a pilot. How far do you think that could potentially grow if it were to be expanded later on, or is it just unlimited capacity?
Well, Yeah, I mean, frankly.
Limited capacity.
Unlimited.
Yeah.
Like that, I'm out.
Boy, I'll tell you what, if you told me 4 years ago these guys would be doing the volume of trips they're doing today, I never would have guessed it. So for me to project what caps are, I think it'd be really important up front to determine the types of trips, and then it goes off of cost of trips. So for instance, if we were to say we're really going to promote a first mile, last mile solution where the targeting of that money is toward those $5, $6 trips to get you into a bus stop, then all of a sudden you're saying, okay, that's 100,000, that's 80 or 100,000 trips. If we said, well, it's really targeted after hours to get people from Madison into downtown Nashville, and now we are looking at those $17, $18 trips, then that really kind of waters it down. So that's why I think the partnerships up front with the community really define scope of the various, say, the 5 mobility issues: first mile, last mile, cross town, after hours, access ride becomes really crucial.
So you would need a period of time to fine-tune the program, and sometime second half of the fiscal year, you might make something available. So it's really a work in progress.
Yeah.
Because we want to work with partners.
Yeah. The other thing that's happening, this is a very new space. So one of the issues we deal with because of the level of federal funding is the federal regulatory structure. And right now, USDOT can't even say how they're kind of playing in this space. And one of the things we're expecting in the next couple of months is for them to issue a solicitation of projects and what they're calling a mobility on-demand sandbox to see how these relationships could work, because it's not really the traditional. The traditional would be we issue a solicitation for private transportation providers to operate some type of service for us, and that is really not the model of what Lyft or Uber or a number of the other, frankly, microtransit operators or what have you are doing. And frankly, USDOT is even trying to figure it out. Like, where does all this fit into the public transportation space?
I did have one question. It just occurred to me. The first mile, last mile in the evenings is typically when I get snagged with surge pricing. What happens to these poor people when that occurs? Because it seems to occur every time there's a sporting event downtown.
Or any major event. I've gotten hit with it too.
Yeah, and then that $6 trip turns into a $36 trip.
Right. Again, those are all issues we're going to need to, frankly, work into a design process, and that's the whole issue of crawl to walk, walk to run. So before we say it's unlimited, we're probably looking at limited startups, monitor, then expand some. What I would say, though, is I'd rather get hit with surge pricing for that 2-mile connection to the bus, at what normally would be a $5 trip to maybe an $8 trip, as opposed to getting hit with a $16 trip that becomes a $30 trip.
I've had the opposite problem. I can't get anybody to pick me up for a short trip if the surge is on. They only want the big trips. So, okay.
Yeah, there's a variety.
No, they don't have to.
They let us know and we can investigate. But yeah, they should be.
They should be big. There's like 8 cars in here, and the one that chooses you is like 10 blocks away. The 4 that are right in your block didn't pick you.
I think it all comes back to, I know one of the questions Talia is, how is this innovative? Well, the flip side of innovative is there's a lot of things we're not sure of yet.
Well, but
that's the reason of pilot.
Of trying something new.
Exactly.
This is an interesting.
And why the operative word in this is pilot.
Yeah. And that is our time. We thank you all for coming. Thank you so much. And we thank you guys for being here.
You take the rest of the day off.
Good to see you. Thank you so much.